Reds only 3 wins at this point, coming in 3-7, 10 games in. They start a new series with the Giants tonight. Game 1, 2, and 3, 3 on Wednesday, and then of course they'll turn their attention towards the Pirates after an off day Thursday, and they return home this coming up weekend, so that's good. As we sit here right now, so it was announced earlier today. We'll stay with Major League Baseball here for a second, but coming into the year, I remember we were kind of keeping an eye on the Blue Jays with Vlad Guerrero Jr. And they couldn't get a deal done before the season started. In fact, news had came out that they were just going to that they were not going to negotiate on a deal during the season. It almost kind of reminded me of the Jamar Chase Cincinnati Bengals thing, where this time it was more so the Bengals were the ones that came out and said they were not going to negotiate during the season. That was like a team policy, if you will. Vlad Guerrero and his camp came out and said if they didn't get a deal done before the season, that they were not going to be interested at all in negotiations once the season started. Apparently that was not the case, because Vlad Guerrero Jr. and the Toronto Blue Jays are in agreement on a 14-year, $500 million contract extension. Of course, that's all pending a physical. So that's pretty big news coming in. Again, a 14-year, $500 million contract. Not bad, because we were already making the joke. So when that news came out that they weren't getting a deal going, I'm like, oh man, Dodgers going to get a good one. Dodgers getting a good one at some point. But he will remain in Toronto. They get the deal done. I love seeing stuff like this. I hate watching star players leave. I hate when teams let star players go in baseball and then they go to the biggest market and the biggest contract possible. I love seeing that a team was able to draft a player, develop a player, keep a player, and that's what happens here. That's a good thing for Major League Baseball. Obviously a good thing for Vlad Guerrero Jr., but even more importantly, good for Toronto. They get the face of their franchise for, well, at least a 14-year deal.
Yeah, Vlad did clarify after the announcement what he said, and obviously you can believe him or not, but he said since the season started, it has been just his agent. By that quote, before the season started, he meant he would not partake in those. Now, obviously, Who knows whether or not he's telling the truth in those lines. I have a tough time believing you're going to sign a 14-year, $500 million contract without being a part of those negotiations in some way or another. But that's at least the story he's sticking to. Yeah, no, certainly good for the Blue Jays, for Blue Jays fans, for Vlad Guerrero. I think Blue Jays fans were certainly getting a little antsy. They were second or third for Shohei Ohtani. They were right in the mix for Roki Sasaki and Yamamoto. So they've been right up there. Juan Soto as well before he signed with the Mets. So every big name free agent over the last however many years they've been going after. And I think everyone kind of unanimously circled those moves and said they're trying to prove to Vlad before he hits free agency that they're the real deal and they're trying to commit to something. Now, obviously, they weren't able to get any of those major signings across the finish line, but, I mean, getting Vlad done now, another homegrown free agent, Bo Bichette, going to be on the market after this season. Maybe they shift their focus, keep those guys in-house. Certainly a good thing to see Vlad stay in Toronto. He's one of those guys that falls into that group that if he does hit the open market, it's New York or LA.
Yep.
There's no other option. Maybe you get, the one-off of the Giants going all in on a big-time player or something along those lines. But the number of teams that would be able to court Vlad Guerrero Jr. in free agency, and it's not a long list. So always a win for, little old us here in Cincinnati when one of those big-time teams doesn't get one of those star players. I guess the Blue Jays kind of fall in that range as well. They have the money. They can play with that. But it still feels like they get to keep someone home. So that's a positive. I'm glad that he'll probably play in one uniform his entire career, if I had to guess.
There's not a better feeling in the world than your favorite player being with your team for his entire career. I wish that was going to be the case in Cincinnati with Elly De La Cruz. It's not. We got to see that with Joey Votto, which was really, really cool, and I'm very thankful we got to see that with Joey Votto here in Cincinnati. But as the new age baseball comes around and you have the Dodgers deferring $2 trillion to the year 2072, it's near impossible for the Reds to be able to compete or even be in the same ballpark stratosphere as some of these big market teams. I don't think they have a shot in hell to get Elly De La Cruz to stay in Cincinnati, which is unfortunate. That's a problem we'll deal with in 5 years or 4 years from now, 3 years from now, but good for the Blue Jays, and 500 for that's what, 35 million, 34 million, something around there. 35. So it's like that's what you pay. That's what you pay a really good baseball player in the year 2025.
Interesting to note, at least right now, none of that money deferred. None of that money of that $500 million Blue Jays contract deferred. So, round of applause to the Toronto Blue Jays. When you pay star players, they actually pay them. So kudos to them. It'd be nice if everyone did.
Now, and the cool thing about Vlad Guerrero Jr., obviously, with the Blue Jays too. Obviously, I remember watching his dad play. I'm 35 years old. I could finally say that. How about that? But I do. I remember watching his dad play. His dad was one of my favorite players. So there you go. But obviously that's big for baseball, big for him. Again, like I said, like baseball is just every time you see a star like him develop. You rarely remember him you rarely remember the player for the team that they started out with. You remember him for the team that they ultimately go on to have the most success with, and that's what we're seeing. Like, we're not going to remember Shohei for his time with the Angels, right? Mookie at least had success with the Red Sox too, so that helps. You're not only going to remember him for his time with the Dodgers, this, that, and the other, but you think of Bryce Harper. People forget, I don't say they forget that he played for the Nationals, but you just remember him more for what he's doing now. And I think that's the thing. At least we're going to be able to associate Vlad Guerrero Jr. with the Blue Jays from the time he came into the league until the time his career comes to an end, barring any kind of, shift in direction from the front office when it comes to, Toronto. So, and Votto, same thing. Obviously, you mentioned Elliott. He's a Red. You don't think of him with anybody else. He's simply a Cincinnati Red. Jake, there were some other contract extensions, too, around the league, one that does impact the Reds.
Two other notable contract extensions that I think do impact the Reds. A little bit further back than this weekend. We touched on them lightly last week, but now with the information that Matt McLain turned down an extension this offseason, I think both of these are very, very pertinent to the situation here. Jackson Merrill, the outfielder in San Diego for the Padres, finished second last year to Paul Skeens in National League Rookie of the Year voting. Many people thought he should have won it. He was a very, very good player in his rookie season. He signed a 9-year, $116 million extension before this season, or maybe right after opening day in that window right at the start of this season. And then the Red Sox last week, after extending Garrett Crochet to a big money contract to be their ace for the near future, they extended Christian Campbell, their top prospect second baseman, who came up and debuted with them on opening day this year. So getting that contract done before he played in the majors, as opposed to Merrill after his number one, ace season in center field for the Padres. So I think these, obviously the Vlad contract's the big news in terms of getting contracts done, but I think these two contracts go much more in tune with what the Reds are trying to do with Matt McLain. Obviously, McLain's not a $500 million player. Maybe he will be down the line, but if you're talking about an extension with Matt McLain, a guy who played one season, or a little bit over half of one season, got hurt and missed a whole season, you're not talking about $500 million. You're talking about something to eat up the rest of his rookie contract, get into arbitration, and maybe add a year or two, if you're lucky, add 3. And I think that's what we're seeing here in these other contracts, and I think these are the price points that he's going to be closer to. I think if they would have offered him something close to that Jackson Merrill contract, that 9 years for $116 million, I think that's an easy yes for Matt McLain and Matt McLain's camp. But as we see now, again, scratched from the last 2 games with a hamstring injury, is that the type of money you're comfortable giving a player that hasn't shown you any kind of consistency when it comes to being healthy? So I think somewhere between that 8-year, $60 million deal for Christian Campbell before his debut and that 9-year, $116 million deal for Jackson Merrill, somewhere in that, I know it's large, but somewhere in between those two contracts, I think would be where Matt McLain would find his sweet spot in terms of an extension for the Reds.
I hope the Reds can get a deal done with Matt McLain. They have to extend somebody. They can't have a team full of rentals. Eventually, you have to sign one of these guys in the lineup once they show you anything. Jacob's point, and I think everybody's point should be, you get these deals done early before they can do it. To be fair to Matt McLain, are you in the best position when a team offers you a long-term deal after the worst season that you could have probably had, which is when you weren't healthy? So it makes.
And that's what he said.
Yeah.
That was the quote. I didn't play last season.
Yeah.
So he's obviously just believing in himself.
There's no reason for him to sign that contract. When I assume him and everybody in Major League Baseball knows the Reds aren't coming in with big numbers. Yeah. So I imagine after this year there'll be a better answer, a better picture for it. Hopefully, if he plays, God willing. So they have to lock up somebody on this lineup. I'm hoping it's Matt McLain. I could see it being CES, I guess. I don't know yet, but frustration.
I do think something that's, especially with the Reds, that's of the utmost importance when you talk about these extensions with these guys, that we all think if they play to their ceiling, get out of the Reds' price range. You're never going to be able to beat the Dodgers when it comes to how many hundreds of millions of dollars you're able to pay these guys.
Yeah.
The benefit that the Reds have, what they have over these guys in terms of the extension is these rookie contracts, is how the MLB sets up these debuts and the contracts that come off of them. And the Reds have control of these guys for 5-6 years. So the way you get these extensions done in a team like Cincinnati that can't compete at the top of the open free agent market is you give them value in those years they're already under contract. You eat up those rookie years with slightly higher paydays, lower than the top of the market, but a significant increase from what they'd get paid anyway that they're already under contract. That's the only wiggle room the Reds have. That's the only negotiation tactic the Reds have. So that's why every offseason we all unanimously, opening day starts, lost another year on Elly's contract. There goes a little bit of our negotiation power. And it's the same for everyone else. The best case that the Reds have to extend any of these guys is the earlier they get it done. And every single year and month and game that comes off after that, their chances go down. And that's just the reality of being a small market baseball fan.
Yeah, I remember a lot of this talk during like the T. Higgins drama in Cincinnati when it came to the Bengals and the Bengals need to do a job of paying their players earlier. Well, just because you want to approach a player to try and pay them earlier doesn't mean that they have to do it. It doesn't mean that they're going to do it. I mean, some players are good enough to where they're going to gamble on themselves, and that's what basically it sounds like Matt McLain is doing. I do find it ironic that the same weekend that this comes out, that Matt McLain turned down a contract extension negotiation offer before opening day, comes the same weekend that he is scratched from the lineup not once but twice, played in between both of those, the most Cincinnati Reds thing ever, by the way. Scratching you from the lineup due to an injury, being in the lineup the next day, and then taken out again the next day. That's the most Reds thing ever right there. But hopefully that's not something that lingers on. I just find the irony in that when it comes to the report that came out regarding the future of Matt McLain. I will say this, Matt McLain, I get him wanting to gamble on himself, but he's not Elly De La Cruz. I know we put them as the 1-2 punch. He's not Elly De La Cruz. Elly has a lot of leverage, obviously. I think the ceiling for him is through the roof. I think the ceiling for Matt McLain is pretty damn high as well, but the thing is, can he reach it due to health? And I think every injury that he experiences, he needs to really consider sprinting to the front office of Nick Kroll and saying, where do I sign? Because right now the Reds would be gambling more. If you I think Hunter Green, it was a big gamble, him signing that cheaper deal to extend with the Cincinnati Reds. Elly would be gambling. It would be silly for Elly to sign an early contract. It just would. I want him to, but it would be silly of him to at this point. Even with as much as he stinks right now, it would be silly of him to do that. But for Matt McLain, he's one more tight hammy away from, I think he needs to hobble over to the front desk and buzz himself into Great American Ballpark and ask to see Nick Kroll so he can sign that extension right now. I think he's gambling way too much by not signing that extension. Do you guys agree or disagree?
I don't necessarily disagree, but to push back a little bit on the Elly discussion on an extension, I don't know that he would, be so dumb to sign an extension right now. I think if that extension is 12, 15, 17 years, then yeah, certainly he's giving up some value, but for the next 4 seasons, he's making $700,000. If the Reds give him a 7-year extension at $20 million a year, he's making a ton more money than he would have. Obviously, he's losing, a year or two of free agency on that big-time contract, but you still hit the open market at 27, 28 years old before you're 30. You get that big payday, and the Reds are able to eat up this rookie contract while giving him a little bit on the back end. I think that's the only way they can get this done. I think Reds fans are a little bit too locked in on will Elly retire a Red, and they should be more locked into, can we steal an extra year or two in this whole thing? And I think that's the way the Reds can go about it and make it make sense for everybody. I mean, we've all heard about the deal Elly has where he has to give some of his money he makes from Major League Baseball to the scouting firm, and I think a lot of that can come into play with contracts like this and wanting to make more serious money earlier in your career. So will he sign a 12 or 15-year extension like Vlad just did? Absolutely not. I don't think the Reds would ever offer him something like that. Would they, be able to maybe get him at a 7 or 8 year deal that makes a lot of sense for everybody? Maybe. And I think that door is closing every single year we advance, but it might still be open. In terms of Matt McLain, if he suffers another serious injury, do we want to extend him?
Yeah, I don't know.
Fair.
Big money extensions in Cincinnati kneecap this team if they don't work. We're not the Cubs. We can't give Jason Hayward a Brinks truck and just be fine when he can't hit. That doesn't work in Cincinnati. If we give Matt McLain a 10-year, $120 million deal, and he's not good or he's not on the field, this team's gonna be in the gutter for a long time. So obviously I want to extend a lot of these guys, but I would be very cautious in terms of extending Matt McLain with this injury history.
I don't think Matt McLain's gambling at all because what leverage do the Cincinnati Reds have that he's not going to play? I mean, he legitimately has to play. The lineup's not good. Matt McLain's by far the second best player in the lineup, and that's whether he's hurt or not. So he's like, you know what? Why not play a year, see if I can play a year, and see if I can get even more money? Because the Reds have to offer him something. The fan base would destroy him if they didn't.
Yeah.
I don't think the Reds have any power in that specific scenario. Regarding the Elly thing, Elly's not a long-term player for the Reds, but like Jacob just said, if you can get Elly in his prime here in Cincinnati, I don't know. Maybe he's more enticed to do a 6-year, 7-year deal, 8-year deal, opposed to a 12, 15-year deal. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers would be on that. And certainly when the players or when the league goes on lockdown in a few years, maybe we'll have a better understanding of what that looks like. But as far as Matt McLain, no, I don't think he's gambling at all. I think he's playing with house money.
If you had to rank non-extended players on the Reds, who do you think is the most likely that they get done? Obviously, that basically just excludes Hunter Green and Jose Trevino.
Matt McLain will get done.
I think the most likely option is Tyler Stevenson.
I think Matt McLain gets done first.
Okay.
I think that's over Tyler Stevenson.
I was pretty surprised Stevenson didn't get done this offseason, if I'm going to be completely honest. I thought they were going to get that done before this most recent arbitration hearing. I still think Stevenson is a no-brainer to extend him as the catcher of the future for this team. I mean, why mess around with potentially losing him when he's shown what he's able to do when he's out there? I think him and then McLain would be the two no-brainers.
That's another one, though. Obviously he's going to be injured for a long time this season.
Yeah.
Are you paying him as a catcher or are you paying him as a DH or first base?
It's a very good point.
That's why I don't know if Stevenson would be ahead of McLain, but I do think you're right. I think Stevenson and McLain have to be extended.
I don't think there's a lot of options.
Outside of that, there's nobody.
So much talent.
CES, if you believe. Steer, no.
A contract as a utility bat, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. If he'd sign that. I don't know if he'd sign that, but yeah.
Right. I mean, you think one of those 29 teams is giving him a left fielder contract?
Good point. It's a good point. Maybe if somebody's desperate enough.
India got one.
India did get one.
If Steer did sign it, it'd be with that left hand of his. It would not be with his right hand. He's be very, very careful. But either way. All right, Off the Bench, presented by UDF. We close things out, at least on the radio side, when we come back. Don't go anywhere.